Okay.
You're listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guests. And I got to tell you something, people. It's this week in New Jersey. It's in the 60s, which is unbelievable. It's setting records, and I'm quite excited because I've been going out in the cold weather, and this last week, our temperature was like 51, 32, 45, 66, and 67. And it's sort of like the lottery, the pick five. And we actually won today. Anyway, we have a great show today. My guest is a writer, producer. He was in a movie that I absolutely loved. It came out in 1984. I love this movie, and it's hard to find now. And my guest is Dana Olsen. How you doing, Dana?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Now, you're in Evanston, so you guys are in the midst of that storm, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably coming your way. The wind's blowing like 30 miles an hour outside this morning. We're getting everything here. Yesterday it rained. Today it's blowing wind like crazy, and later on it's supposed to snow. So it's been a lot of fun here.
Yeah, exactly. So I got to ask you a question to start. I want to talk about your career, but I saw Gary Kroger posted a picture of you and him and another gentleman with penises on your nose with glasses. And
Yes.
and I believe you did some show. I want to hear what that's from. And I heard you guys did a show last week, right?
We did. This has been like our fourth New Year's. It's the first one Gary's done with us for about 5 years. Tradition here in Evanston, where a bunch of us guys that started out in comedy at Northwestern years ago get together once a year and do a comedy review like we used to do in the old days. And a friend of ours, Steve Rashid, who's an amazing musician, has a beautiful performance venue in Evanston, part of the Evanston Dance Center that his wife Bea runs. And a few years ago, once they opened it up, nothing was going on over New Year's. And Paul Barras, who's another classmate of Gary and mine, he and I and his wife Victoria had done a comedy review in Hollywood. And we thought, nobody's ever doing anything over New Year's. It's always kind of a drag, so why don't we do a show? And so we resurrected some old comedy material and wrote some new sketches. And we've been doing this now for, I think this was our fifth New Year's show in Evanston, and we brought Gary on board this year. And the old adage for our type of theater was it no joke too cheap, no prop too large. and Paul showed up with a bunch of Groucho Marx sort of glasses, only the noses were actually penises.
Right.
So I confess and I apologize to all your listeners that yes, we did go that low.
I love it. You know, when I did stand-up comedy years ago, when I started out, I had such stage fright that I actually wore them. I wore them once as a prop, and I said, "Oh, look, I'm a dickhead," and it was such a cheap laugh, but it got me over that stage fright in the beginning.
Everybody loves a cheap laugh. Come on, man. You know, it was just a momentary thing at the very end of the song, and we, usually get one comment. Well, I thought that was unnecessary.
Yeah.
Then we know we scored.
So now, when did you start? When did you know you wanted to get into this profession? I know you went to Northwestern, but as a kid, were you a funny kid? Were you a theater kid, or is it something that you grew into as you got older?
I started out drawing cartoons. I had two older sisters, so I didn't have any brothers, and I spent a lot of time in my room by myself. And I drew cartoons. I was like addicted to Mad Magazine. I used to knock off the caricatures, and I ended up placing a cartoon in my high school newspaper, and then that led to me getting hired to write for the high school variety show, and that was kind of the first time I got on stage. And then I started doing stand-up when I was in high school in a couple of clubs in Chicago, and I was like 17. And I didn't really have much of an act, but I was kind of unique because I was so young, and they let me have the stage. So I had like about 6 minutes or something when I was in high school, and then I got to Northwestern and I got into the improv thing. So yeah, I would say about midway through high school when I got into the variety show at school is when I started thinking, oh, this is fun.
Now,
it came easier to me than a lot of other things.
Now, was Northwestern your first choice? Because it's such a good school, and I don't know, was it? Sometimes I think that it's so hard to get into now because you and so many other great talents have come out of it. They probably raised the admissions and made it like super tough. But what was it like to get in when you were there? Was the theater department that renowned and that whole area?
It was. I wasn't a theater major. I wanted to study film, and originally the plan was to go to the University of Illinois, but I think at the time that I was applying, they had closed down their program. So my dad had gone to Northwestern. He was an engineer, but yeah, they had a rep for the theater department, but I wanted to study film, so I actually got admitted as a film major, and the standards were a lot lower. There's no way I would get into Northwestern now. I mean, my high school grades were far from outstanding, and but back in those days, you actually went in and had a personal interview with like an admissions officer, and I think I did well on that. And then I had, some of the extracurriculars looked like, they were a little unique. So, but there's no way I'd get in now. It was a lot different then.
So you were a film guy. Now, how did you end up in the improv world?
There was just like one afternoon, like on a Thursday afternoon or something, I saw an ad in the student newspaper that they were holding auditions for the Improv Comedy Review, and having done something similar in high school, I thought, oh, this might be kind of fun, because I wasn't having a great time my freshman year. Everybody was going to the library and studying every night, which is not what I was used to. And so I went and I auditioned for this improv show, and it turned out that a guy that I had known in high school that I had competed against in forensics was in the show. It's the Meow Show. It's still running. They're coming close to like 50 years now. And I got cast my freshman year, and then that's where I ended up meeting Paul and Gary. Well, Gary actually, I've been in a different show, and then later on, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and, a lot of really funny, talented people. And that's the most fun I had at college, absolutely, hands down, was doing that improv show.
Now, how did the other students, did they love it? Like, was it something that it was something that they didn't do, so they would come and watch it and just think it was great?
Yeah, it was pretty new when we got there. Originally, it started, I think, like in the middle '70s as a student-produced variety show, and then about the year I got there, they changed the format to sort of make it a Second City style improvisational comedy review. And during the 4 years that I was there, we definitely grew an audience. It went to we put it up in a small auditorium that was built for projecting films, so there was no backstage. It was very intimate. I think there's maybe 250 chairs in there, maybe. And we would have half a house my freshman year. But by the time we got to be seniors, we were selling out two nights a week on Friday and Saturdays, and doing two shows on both of those nights too. We do like an 8 o'clock and an 11 o'clock or something. So we really grew an audience, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, tickets were like $1.50 or something, and everybody's always looking for something to do at night in college, and this was an easy thing to do and a fun thing, and so yeah, it grew, and now it's like become this institution sort of on campus.
So you're doing that, and then when your time at Northwestern is up, what are your career plans? What do you plan to do? Do you plan to go to LA? Do you plan to go to Chicago because there's a scene there? What did you want to do, and what did you do?
So originally I thought I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and I planned to go out to LA after graduation and take a crack at that. Paul and his directing producing partner Brad Hall, who ended up marrying Julia, they stayed in Chicago and started the Prattsville Theater Company. What happened was, while I was an undergraduate, Gary Marshall, a huge television producer who had Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy on the air at the time that I was an undergrad, and who we lost 2 years ago, sadly. came back to do a visiting artist program at Northwestern. And I got to know him, and talking to him, I thought, well, maybe it would be smarter to try I think I'll take a shot at being a writer as well as being a stand-up comedian. And I got to know him, and I knocked out a spec Laverne and Shirley script and sent it to him, and thinking, well, there's a connection when I move out to L.A. And then his office called me 2 weeks before I graduated and offered me a staff job on Laverne and Shirley. So that's how I got to L.A. I literally graduated on Saturday. On Monday, I was in L.A. with an office on the Paramount lot working as a staff writer, guild position on Laverne and Shirley. So that was the break of breaks.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, that's just, you sit there, you hear about people, struggling. Well, even Gary's story about getting on, SNL. It's something that must have been magic in the air in Chicago at that time, because you guys were landing jobs in a way that are very unconventional.
Yeah, and the Gary and Paul and Brad and Julia story was perhaps even more amazing. They were doing practical theater out of a storefront on Howard Street, which is the dividing line between Evanston and Chicago. You could drink on the south side of the street. You couldn't drink on the north side of the street. They opened up like an 80-seat theater, and were doing improvisational comedy shows, like the Meow Show, and trying to get an audience in. And eventually, they grew an audience like we did on campus, and Bernie Sahlins at Second City offered them the use of what had been the Paul Sills Story Theater, which is behind the Second City building in Piper's Alley in Chicago. And they went in and mounted an improv review there, and that's when Dick Ebersol came, and he was casting a new season of Saturday Night Live, and he hired the four of them on the spot for Saturday Night Live. I think that was 1982. So I'd been in LA for 2 years by then when that happened. But yeah, lots of really great stuff was happening to our crew.
Now, do you feel like what was your experience in writing TV scripts? You wrote a spec, but did you really know the formula? Did you know the layout? I mean, it's something that, specs, a TV script is different than a movie script. I mean, what was your knowledge when you wrote that?
Very rudimentary. I mean, I sort of knew that there had to be a big idea in the episode, and there had to be a beginning and a middle and an end, but in terms of, format and all that, very rudimentary. But, Gary saw something, and I think I actually wrote two. Gary saw something in one of them. And, and then coming onto the show, I mean, you pick it up very, very quickly. Now, of course, this was back in the days before computers, so we would actually sit around a table, make notes by hand, ship it out to be typed, and then when we were reworking the script, you would literally cut pieces of the page out and paste them on new pages like in school. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Now, was it intimidating for you because you were so young? I mean, you really didn't have time to breathe, and all of a sudden, you're in Hollywood. You have a job on a show that everybody knows. I mean, what was going through your mind when you were on that plane, or if you drove? I don't know how you got there. Were you nervous? Were you scared?
Yeah, I was nervous. I had a pal who had been a year ahead of me at Northwestern, whose parents lived in L.A., and so I had an apartment lined up. So I had a buddy that I could live with, and there were, I had a couple of friends out there. But yeah, I was working all the time, and everybody was older than me. I was, the youngest guy on the staff by far. But it was really. I was nervous, and I was kind of lonely because I didn't really know anybody. But it was really fun because, I was surrounded by guys that had written on The Odd Couple, and, Gary was really great. He always had a space on one of his staffs for an older comedy writer, usually a guy that had given him a break when he was a young comedy writer. And there's a funny story. There was a guy on the Happy Days staff. We shared the same office floor as they did. They were on the other end of the building. And he had a guy on the Happy Days staff named Harry Crane, who had been around so long he'd written for the Marx Brothers. And I remember a story. There was some young writer, it wasn't me, but somebody on the Happy Days staff was like, having a rough day and saying, God, I don't know. He goes, is this real writing? I mean, all I do is write Fonzie enters and everybody claps. He goes, I don't know if I can do this anymore. This is driving me crazy. I don't know. And Harry Crane says, you know, kid, when I'm feeling like that, you know what I do? And he takes a cigar out of his mouth and he goes, I put my paycheck on the front seat of my Mercedes and drive home going, zippity-doo-dah. So it was really fun, you know. There are guys like that hanging around that are written for radio and stuff. I mean, it was a good time.
So now when you're writing, are you taking time to do stand-up, or was that not in the equation right now?
No, I stopped doing stand-up after I was making a living as a writer. Stand-up is so hard. And I never really had much of an act. I really kind of just did it as a hobby. I never, as a student, I was doing it because it was fun. But man, to actually try to do that as a living, I have friends that have been stand-up comedians for 40 years, and it's a really rugged way to make a living.
Now, you're writing. Now, how did the movie Making a Grade come about? I love that movie. It's funny. I was trying to. It's one of those things. There's that, and there's a movie called Windy City Heat that is in Chicago, and you can't. It's so hard to find them. Like, I found Windy City Heat on YouTube. Making a Grade, I can't find. I guess I should go on Amazon. But you're a writer. How do you end up co-starring in a movie?
So what happened was. A friend of mine, Gene Quintano, had written that, and he was producing it for Canon, and it was a very low budget thing, and he was the marching orders were to try to make a comedy sort of based on the preppy thing that was happening in the early '80s, and so he wrote the script, and they went ahead and pressed the production button, as Kane was wont to do. They were rushing the production, so. He had a location nailed down in Memphis, Tennessee, and he had a director, but he needed work on the script. So he wanted to hire me as a writer, but the Canon guys would not spring for extra money to work on the script. They were just like, no, it's fine the way it is. Just go shoot it. And so he cast me so that I would be, on location and help him with the script as we went along. So my role grew. During production, and so that's how that happened. Actually, and I had a little acting experience, obviously coming out of the improv scene at Northwestern and stuff. So I sort of knew what I was doing, and so he liked what he saw. He auditioned me for the director. The director was like, "Fine," and I played this guy who was supposed, Palmer Woodrow. He's supposed to be out of the movie after like the first reel and not come back, but then they found a way to write me into the last couple of reels that come back from Europe or whatever it is and complicate things for Judd. So that's how that happened. Now, and then I never acted again.
I know. Really. I was going to ask you, it's like you're in a movie, and it's funny because Dice was in it and Judd Nelson, and I loved the movie. I thought it was great. It's like one of those things. I love that 80s stuff. But now, why did you decide not to act? Did you just like writing better? Because you had a role. You were in a movie. Most people die to do that. Why did you walk away from acting?
Yeah, you make weird decisions when you're young. I mean, I was making a living as a writer, and as an actor, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to start over again. I'm going to be in a bunch of these, teen exploitation movies if I do it. And so I was a little self-conscious about it. First of all, I have no acting chops. I mean, I'm really just kind of playing, myself, like a stand-up version of myself in that movie. So I was a little self-conscious about that. But, looking back, yeah, maybe I could have doubled down on it and gotten some success. But like I said, I was making a living as a writer, so that would have been sort of a big step, and I think I was wary of biting off more than I could really chew. But, sure, I look back and I go, what if, maybe if I, let them roll me as an actor a little bit more, maybe something else interesting would have happened. But on the other hand, too, I don't mind being anonymous walking down the street.
Right.
So being a writer is always fine with me.
Now, you also wrote, after Laverne and Shirley, you wrote for Johnny Loves Chachi. What was that like writing? Because that was a spinoff. I'm sure that wasn't like you're walking into Laverne and Shirley, which was such a huge hit. It was a spinoff. Right. So what's it like starting off, going from a proven entity to something that's newer?
Actually, that I was not on staff for that. They essentially freelanced one episode of that because they needed to, get, 13 or 26 produced. I had left Laverne and Shirley to do a feature film with David Steinberg and the SCTV guys at Universal called Going Beserk, which did not work, but was great because I got to work with Candy and Flaherty and Levy and all those guys, and David Steinberg. And they came back to me and said, hey, we need an episode of Joni Loves Chachi, and they threw me this idea. They basically, said, here's what we want to do with the episode, and they gave me that episode. So I wrote that. So I didn't know that show super well, and I didn't last more than a season, I don't think.
I don't know.
But, basically the tone of the show was consistent with Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days, and all the producers and all the guys were dudes that I knew. So that wasn't difficult. It was kind of like just another episode of Happy Days, really, but that had been expanded.
Now, when did you start learning how to write screenplays? You were writing TV, and then you said Going Berserk's a screenplay. When did you learn to write, and what made you go into that direction?
So when I got to Laverne and Shirley, the Screen Actors Guild went on strike like 2 weeks after I got to the show. So I got to Hollywood. I worked for 4 weeks, and then they shut down all of television because the Screen Actors Guild was on strike, and they were out for like 2.5 months. So I wrote a screenplay in my downtime. I think I maybe bought Sid Field's book or something, How to Write a Screenplay, and I wrote one with my then buddy / roommate, and it was a slasher movie parody. Years and years, I might add, before the Scary Movie franchise, and it was called The Lawnmower Killer, and we finished it, and by that time, I had another pal from Northwestern who was in the training program of the William Morris Agency. They made him an agent. He took me as his first client. I gave him my script. He ended up selling it to an independent producer. I went back to Laverne and Shirley, did another season. Then the Writers Guild went out on strike, and I wrote another movie script in my downtime. That was a longer strike. That one lasted from like June to October or something. And by the way, I'm not getting paid while this is happening. But I'd sold this slasher movie parody script, so I had a little bit of money in the bank. And they went and they made that picture. It was called. They ended up calling it Wacko. They made it for about $900,000, I think, maybe even less. I don't know. But with a couple of people in the cast, Stella Stevens, George Kennedy, Joe Don Baker, Dice Clay was in that movie. So I just kind of learned by experience. I was cranking them out during the first two major labor strikes that occurred while I was in Hollywood, and I got lucky with one of them. So that's how I was kind of self-taught, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people back then were. It's something that I lived in Hollywood for a while, and everyone had the Sid Field book. That and read the William Goldman Adventures in Screen Trade. They were like the two books back then that everybody read. It's changed now because people don't go to what is it, Samuel French. They don't go to that. I think it closed. So everyone does everything online, but those were the go-to books. But now, for you, you're a young guy. You have this writing job, and then there's a strike, and then you're writing, and there's another strike. You're writing the screenplays, but do you get frustrated at all, thinking, you have this staff writing job, and everyone keeps going on strike? Was it pissing you off at all?
It was a little frightening because, when you're young and you don't know any better, it's like, oh my God, it's the end of Hollywood. I got here, I got a job, and now it's all blowing up. And now it's, 40 some odd years later, and I've been through, 8 or 9 of these strikes. And even now, the Writers Guild just fired all the agents like a year ago, and nobody has an agent anymore. So, things change. But yeah, I was it was frustrating. But the nice part was, because the second strike, the Writers Guild, I wrote a spec script. It was a Godzilla parody called It Ate Cleveland, and I got a lot of traction out of that. I got a lot of meetings coming out of the strike with feature development people at the studios, because not a lot of material had been produced during the strike, and they were looking to feed the production pipeline. And I ended up getting a lot of meetings and picked up, a job here and there. So actually being forced to stay home and write because of the strike turned out to be a good thing. But at the time, it was scary and a little nerve-wracking, because I didn't know what to expect.
So with your screenwriting, as you said, Wacko was a lower budget. Going Beserk, I'm sure, wasn't a huge budget. Well, then The Burbs comes along, and that ends up being a pretty big budget movie with a young Tom Hanks. When did you start writing that, and how did that end up getting made?
So The Burbs actually derived from a half-hour pilot I wrote and sold to CBS called The Sheriff of Maple Street. And that came close to getting produced, but they had something else going, I don't know, that bumped it. I got the rights back. CBS was very generous with me, by the way, and I got the rights in terms of letting me have the rights to the pilot script back, and I expanded it into a screenplay, and I was carrying that around as sort of my calling card, my audition piece, so to speak. And it bounced around a number of places. It was at it got optioned by a couple of different companies. I think David Geffen's company, when they were making features early on in the history of that company, they optioned it for a while. Then it went to Billy Crystal's management company, who had produced a couple of things for Billy, and Billy was attached to it to play the Ray Peterson role for a while. And then he fell out to do something else, and it ended up at Brian Grazer, Ron Howard's company, Imagine. And we got Joe Dante attached, but it still wasn't a green light until Hanks fell into it, and then Tom was coming off a Big, and which I think was released during production, and then he became once Big came out, he was like the bankable comedy lead in Hollywood. So we got real lucky with timing with Tom, and also the fact that he's just the greatest guy ever. As cool a dude and as classy a guy as you could ever expect to work with, as is evident from when you see him on the Golden Globes or whatever. He's everything you think he is. He's just really aces, and so we got really lucky, and we shot the whole thing on the Universal backlot over a summer, so he didn't have to travel, which was appealing to him. There was a cool ensemble. Carrie Fisher, who I like tremendously, was in. Bruce Dern, who is just hilarious and the greatest. So that was a really nice experience.
Now, during that experience, from your original written screenplay, how much did it change by the time it was shot?
I think there's more of me in that movie than in any other thing that I've had produced, but there are things that I would go back and change, and there were things that were, put into the movie that, originally I wrote it as this little sort of dark, weird comedy that I thought somebody would make for $1 million, and then, Tom falls into it, and all the rules change because you got a major star and a big, big budget. So I think it was sort of a much larger, broader, more colorful film than I had imagined it. I thought it was going to be like this dark little sort of, Hitchcockian thing, and kind of like a little bit more subtle than it actually is, although I thought Tom was great in it. And it got, Joe Dante was directing it, and it was, it was very broad and very colorful, and had, I think I remember the whole nightmare sequence was all Joe, and originally the script had a very sort of dark ending. I don't know how well you remember the ending, but they load Ray into the ambulance, and then the ambulance takes off, and it turns out that the Klopeks are actually driving the ambulance. And the original end of the movie was the ambulance just pulls down the street, and that's the last we see of Ray, and the audience is left wondering what happened to him with the Klopeks behind the wheel. But the studio was like, no, you can't leave it ambiguous like that with Tom Hanks. He's got, we can't do that. So if you watch the movie now, it sort of ends 2 or 3 different times as we're trying to figure out what exactly the right beat is to end the movie on. Although I like the little piece that he has with Corey Feldman at the very end of the release version. But originally he was left in dire straits, being hauled off in the ambulance by the Klopeks. So I guess that was the biggest change.
Now, after you write that, and Tom Hanks is in it, how does the traction on you change in Hollywood? Are people calling you because they look at it, even if they don't know the backdrop? You wrote it. You wrote a Tom Hanks movie. How did it change? Did people start calling on you more?
Yeah, you have your windows of hotness. You get a picture like that made. I mean, it wasn't a monster hit. It had a fairly respectable opening, but it wasn't a monster hit. I think it made its money back ultimately, but yeah, you have a window of hotness where you have people coming after you for projects. I forget exactly what I did immediately after the Burbs. Let's see, that was like '89. Oh, then I rolled over. Then I got into a writing partnership. I did a Chevy Chase movie after that called Memoirs of an Invisible Man. And so, yeah, you can trade on the heat a little bit, but it's, the flame goes out quickly because there's so many people doing it out there, and there's other guys that have big monster deals at the studios, and they put those dudes on and whatever. I was always kind of like freelancing around. So it's never not a struggle. The only other time that I felt I had perceptible heat as a screenwriter was after George of the Jungle opened real big. But Disney rolled me right into Inspector Gadget after that, and I was one of 14 writers on that project. But I was the first guy in. But those windows don't stay open really a really long time. I mean, you gotta strike while the iron is hot. How many old adages am I going to do on this interview? But strike while the iron is hot. So yeah, the window is open for a while, and the heat's there for a while. But
now you said you had
it turns over.
You said you had a writing partner.
For a while, yeah, I was working with Bob Collector. That was right about after the Burbs, I think, and we got a couple of pretty good projects together. We ended up getting one picture made with Chevy Chase. We worked with Chevy a lot. We had a deal at Warner Brothers, and I had been working on my own for 6 or 7 years by then. It was fun to have a partner because we could sit around together and make each other laugh. And so we had a deal at Warner Brothers. We worked a little bit on. We did a little production work on Christmas Vacation. We worked on, the heck else did we do? I don't know, we worked on a couple of things for Chevy, and ended up getting this movie made with John Carpenter directing, which is, boy, that's an odd pairing, Chevy Chase and John Carpenter. But we got it made, based on a book, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and boy, that didn't do any business at all. They didn't know what to do with that one. It was like, Chevy, I think, respectably wanted to stretch a little bit. He'd been a huge box office star for Warner Brothers in the 80s, and he wanted to do something a little different than Clark Griswold. And so he got this book, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and, I think the studio wasn't sure how to sell him as something other than Clark Griswold. And so ultimately that was a tough project, but it was a really good script at one point. I don't know what the hell happened, but
yeah. Now, how did you find your writing partner? How do you you're an established writer? How do you go about finding a writing partner back then?
He was a pal of my agent's, Bob, and we met at a barbecue and having a couple of drinks and making each other laugh. And he had done a couple of low budget pictures shot in Mexico. I think he was a really funny guy and a really bright guy. And there was a project out there that other mutual friends of ours were getting some traction on. This guy Steve Zacharias, who wrote Revenge of the Nerds, and he had a deal at Paramount, and he had this idea to do sort of I guess the easiest way to explain it would be a precursor to Borat. It was called The Vulgarians, and it was like it was about three idiot brothers, not unlike the Festrunk brothers on Saturday Night Live, and not unlike Borat, who come from this mythical Eastern Bloc country called Bulgaria and come to America, and that we set a goal for ourselves to make the crudest, lowest possible comedy that we could, and so that's how Bob and I got thrown together. So we just wrote this like crazy, ridiculous, broad, vulgar screenplay called The Vulgarians, and that got a little traction. Bounced around for a while, but that's how I met him. I mean, he was a friend of he was an old buddy of my agent's, and we met at a barbecue, and this project fell into our laps, and I think we ended up writing about, I don't know, 5 or 6 screenplays together. We were probably together for about 3 years, something like that.
Now, I'm looking at your IMDb, and after Inspector Gadget, there's a 10-year gap. Were you still in Hollywood? Were you still working, or did you take off to raise a family?
Yes, basically. We moved from L.A. back to Chicago. All 3 of my kids were born in L.A., but yeah, right about that time, George of the Jungle, Inspector Gadget, we moved back to Chicago, and I was still doing, I was still picking up screenplay jobs, and but I was raising my kids, back here. We had made a decision. Their mother was from Chicago as well. We actually met in Los Angeles, but had always figured, one of these days we'll move back to Chicago. So my kids were born out there, and we decided, now might be a great time. So we moved back to Chicago, and yeah, there was a 10-year gap where I was still working. I didn't get anything produced, but I was still working, and so that's the explanation for that gap in my career.
Well, now, why did you move back? Like, I moved back 2 years ago to New Jersey. So many people I know are leaving L.A. now, because especially you have kids, and you want. I hear a lot of people say they don't want to raise their kids in L.A. And something that, and I still think, I grew up in New Jersey. You move back to Chicago. I do think there's a better work ethic and just a better. It's just a different feel in Chicago and New York and New Jersey. Is that why you wanted to raise your kids in Chicago, just because the school system's better, it's cleaner, it's nicer?
I think yes, ease of living, and their grandparents were here. We wanted them to know their grandparents before they croaked, and without sounding like I'm denigrating my friends that still live out there and have raised beautiful children, but it was like, I kind of wanted my kids to have sort of a Midwestern upbringing, and it was okay with me if they weren't overexposed to the television and film industry, and as it worked out, they're all independent, living on their own, and working at careers and doing well here, not in the business, and that's okay with me. There's a lot to be said for being an artist, but it's a difficult road to hoe, and I had a lot of really lucky breaks, and I was very fortunate to get the run that I did. But I wouldn't have discouraged any of my kids if they wanted to pursue the arts as a career, but I would have been sure to be very realistic with them about how I felt about their prospects and what they could expect to face. So I was more than happy that they chose not to go that way, and I think obviously the odds would have been much greater had we stayed in California and they'd grown up around that business, that they might have drifted that way. So that's why we came back.
Now you're living in Chicago, and you're the creator of Henry Danger. Were you pitching stuff from Chicago when you were? How did that work? Did you have to fly out to LA to pitch, or how did it work to get projects in I can't think of the word, in motion, living in the Midwest,
Yeah.
but yet in LA. How did that work?
Yeah, basically I had to fly out there and pitch stuff. And going back to making the grade, as a matter of fact, after that 10-year gap, I started doubling down again on my LA contacts, and I got back in touch with Gene Quintano, who had written and produced Making the Grade. And I had been, kicking around this idea of a kid who was an apprentice to a superhero in various media. I thought, maybe it'll be a book, maybe it'll be a movie, maybe it's going to be a television show. And Dan Schneider, who was the rock star producer at Nickelodeon at the time, had been in Making the Grade. That was his first job in the entertainment business. He was living in Memphis where we shot the picture, and Gene cast him in the movie, and that was his first gig. And so we went back, and I went in, I pitched him this idea, and he liked it. And long story short, he gets it on the air, and that's Henry Danger. So yeah, it was about going back and forth, and that was obviously the drawback of moving to Chicago is I can't exactly get in my car and drive over the hill to 20th Century Fox to take a meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the spur of the moment. I had to plan weeks where I could be in LA and take 40 different meetings or whatever, and and take my chances, and that made it difficult. But you keep slugging away, you stay in the ring, and eventually something lands. Hopefully, if you're lucky.
Now,
so yeah, that's. Go ahead.
I know. I was going to say, as a creator, what were your responsibilities different than when we know as a screenwriter and a TV writer you write, but as a creator, do you have more responsibility and more stuff to do?
You would if, like, I partnered with Dan Schneider. He already had a company in place at Nickelodeon that had a 20-year run. I mean, I don't think there was a year for the last 20 years that Dan didn't have a show on prime time on Nickelodeon. I mean, his run was amazing. So that was. I'm the only one that ever co-created a show with him. By the way, he's a co-creator on it because he's the guy who got it on the air. It wasn't me. I mean, he told Nickelodeon, "No, this idea's got legs, and let's do it." So basically, that idea just kind of we jacked it into the Schneider's Bakery Machinery, which is his production company, and it happened. Ordinarily, you create a show like that, and depending on who, I don't have a long list of television credits, so but if I did as a creator, if I'm I don't know, J.J. Abrams or stuff or something, yeah, he would be the showrunner. In other words, he would be the boss of the show. He'd hire all the writers. He'd hire his his executive. Well, he might not run the writers' room. He might hire somebody to do that. But ordinarily, yes, there would be a lot more responsibility for me on a Dan Schneider show. No, I was just a senior writer and creator on the show. I only actually worked on the show for the first season. I was in LA for, I don't know, about 18 months to produce the pilot and the first season of the show, and then I stepped away and came back to Chicago, and the Schneider production company ran the show for the subsequent seasons.
Now, as I did my research on you, I found you're very. There's not a lot out there on you. I'll tell you that much. I was trying to find different stuff, but I read an article that you were interviewed. I think it was in Evanston paper. You're a big film historian. Kinda,
yeah. I mean, I'm a film nerd. Yeah.
Now, when did this love of film? When did you start really getting into film?
So as a kid growing up in Chicago, there were movies on television all the time. And I grew up in Park Ridge, and Park Ridge has one of the great landmark Art Deco movie theaters called the Pickwick, right in the middle of downtown. And it's a gorgeous movie theater. So I spent a lot of afternoons there. They were always my favorite thing to watch. And, as a kid growing up, there were movies on network television all the time. Of course, chopped up by commercials, but, as a kid, you don't care. There was a 3:30 movie and a 10:30 movie and a movie of the week and a Thursday night movie, a Friday night movie, a Saturday night movie. And I just always loved movies. And then I got to Northwestern and I was a film major. And then that opened up, a whole world of classic films and international films. And I took a course that was taught by a gentleman named Jack Ellis on French cinema of the 30s. That was just fascinating to me. And then I learned about Preston Sturgis and John Ford, and basically spent my 4 undergraduate years sitting in a dark, damp room in a basement of a horrible building called the Speech Annex on the Evanston campus that was, I think, built in World War II to store bullets or manure or something, and that's where the film guys hung out. It was just awful. The floor slanted and it leaked and it was cold, but that's where they showed movies. And again, this is like before VHS, so they actually had 16 millimeter projectors showing these old prints, almost on a sheet hanging on the wall. That's how the production facilities were back in those days. And we watched movies and talked about them, and it was really, my thing as undergrad was not as much production as it was theory and criticism. So that's kind of how it sort of fed my Jones. And just over the years, I just spend all my free time watching movies. And last year, I guess last year the article you're talking about, I did a short film series at Studio 5, which is the venue where we do the New Year's show. And they have a nice projection facility there. And I showed a series of about a dozen films last year, like one a month on Sunday afternoons. I love matinees, and talked about them. So that was really fun. But yeah.
Now, how do you think movies have changed, in all those years? Because it's so funny that now, because movies, we watched The Irishman the other night, and it's, 3.5 hours? And going into it, because you see on Facebook, people are like, oh, it's so long, which always cracks me up, because people will binge watch a series on a weekend, but a 3-hour movie is too long. So me and my wife decided...
Oh, right, good point, yeah.
It's crazy, but me and my wife decided, you know what? Maybe we'll watch because you're reading all the people's stuff. So maybe we'll watch part on Friday and part on Saturday. But we sat down and we liked it and we watched the whole thing. But now movies seem so much longer. As someone who's been, loves film like you, do you like a longer movie, or do you want it to be, like the 95-minute type?
It depends. I mean, I get Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was long, but I didn't notice. Not the second time. I saw it twice, and the second time it felt a little long. But the first time I saw it, I was like, no, man, I can hang out here. I mean, Tarantino's always a good time, And I don't really feel like, oh, a movie's got to be 95 minutes long. I don't really hold to that. It just kind of depends. Yes, I thought The Irishman was really long. We got, Linda, my wife, and I watched it. We got 3 hours in and had to go somewhere. And I said, well, we'll watch the last, whatever is it left after 3 hours, when we get home. We got home and I plugged it in. And the last 20 minutes is watching Robert De Niro be lonely in an old person's home. So I thought that was a little overlong. But I like the epics. Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but when I was a kid in the 60s, CBS had a thing called the CBS Thursday and Friday night movies. And they both started at 8 o'clock Central Time. It would have been 9 o'clock Eastern Time if you're in Jersey. And you're probably not as old as me, so you might not remember. But it was a Thursday and Friday night movie. And they would take the longer films of the day and cut them up into 2 pieces. And the ones that I remember were like the epic World War II movies like The Great Escape. So you'd have the first half of The Great Escape on Thursday night, and then they'd show you, clips of the second half for Friday night to get you to tune in. And that was really cool. And those were big, long, epic movies, obviously, long enough to chop up into 2 hours, or rather cover 4 hours of broadcast time with commercials, of course. But I love those pictures, Where Eagles Dare and The Dirty Dozen, those guys were all well over 2 hours, as I recall. So I'm down as long as I'm engaged. You know, what strikes me is movies today, most of them, in my mind, and this is just my opinion, they just take themselves so seriously, and they're so ponderous and slow, and that's what really gets me. It's like, okay, you know, I get the point. You know, I don't have to be here for 2 hours watching, you know, somebody looking out a window at birds flying, and, you know, I'm supposed to figure out what he's internalizing. I mean, please. That's the thing about Tarantino. He's having a good time, man, and there's something new in every frame, and he loves the movies, and it comes out that he loves them so much. So, you know, it's all about tone more than length for me. If I can hang on for the ride, I'm down, and if you can get it done in 90 minutes, I think that's great too. You know.
Now, what are you working on something right now, or have you been pitching stuff lately over the last 2 years? I mean, after Harry Danger, you know, you probably got some heat. What have you been doing?
So I've been ramping up, you know, more feature projects, although trying to figure out what the marketplace looks like. Obviously, the model has changed. Everybody's trying to land something at Netflix, you know, for like an extended 10-episode series or whatever it is, or multiple seasons of 10-episode series. So, you know, I did a feature for some Chinese producers a couple of years ago, just a straight action movie that I did with a partner. And to be honest with you, I don't know if they made it or not. So that was a gig. I mean, I'm kind of more into, like, you know, writing features again, although I'm sort of slowing down. But I've got my head sort of wrapped around a new feature concept that I might have an in somewhere to pitch. But I'm always trying to write something. But, you know, this the New Year's show that I did with Kroger over the holidays, that took up most of my fall because we had to script, I don't know, a dozen sketches and some stuff like that. So that took a lot of time, actually. But yeah, I'm always trying to, you know, the comedy landscape sort of flummoxes me right now. I'm not even sure I want to write a comedy next time. I'm thinking about maybe an action picture or something, or a thriller. Because, you know, comedy it seems to be a very dangerous area now. I don't know. I read an interview with Todd Phillips, who directed Joker, and, you know, coming off of the Hangover pictures, they said, why would you go to like a dark place like the Joker? And he said, you know, comedy's dangerous. He goes, why do I want to get a bunch of people jumping all over me on Twitter for making offensive jokes, you know? He goes, and I'm like, yeah, good point. I mean, it's made it really, really tough. It is true.
So, I mean, I occasionally do a stand-up show back here. If someone calls, and luckily the ones I'm going are older crowds, because I did a show in Philly with my buddy, and the crowd was much younger, and they were just like groaning at everything, and it's like, it's comedy, man. You know, it's like lighten up. It blows my mind sometimes.
Exactly. And so that's how we get our yayas out doing this New Year's show, and it's kind of old school. I mean, we're not crude or offensive or anything, but I mean, you know, we do stuff that makes us laugh. Right. And if it doesn't make you laugh, okay, that's okay. But I mean, it's, you know, we're not out, you know, we don't have our knives out for anybody. but yeah, it's tough, and it's discouraging.
Well, you know, I want to thank you for taking the time today, Dana. As I said, it's so funny. I know I saw Gary posted a picture with you, and I was like, I sent Gary a message, and I said, do you think he'd do my show? Because, I mean, I am like the big Making the Grade fan, and you weren't even supposed to be in it. Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I think it is available on DVD. I have a copy of the DVD somewhere. I think I probably got it on Amazon or something. So if you're looking for it, you might be able to get it. I don't know.
I'll check it out. Anyway, I want to thank you. People, go look up Dana Olsen. Look at his. Go see his. go see his movies. You know, just go rent them or go on Netflix because, you know, you can see he's done a lot of good work. And I want to thank you, people. So check Dana out. Check my Twitter out, people. I'm at Cooper Talk. My website, coopertalk.net. I have over 765 episodes. You can also find it on iTunes. Search Cooper Talk, one word. Instagram, Cooper Talk 1. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guest. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you guys next time.